Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar, DevOps at Scale. Today we are going to learn about DevOps and how Acquia is using SignalFx to transform their organization. On today's webinar, the presenters are myself, Trevor Hansen, a partner solution architect with Amazon Web Services. We have Erin Pacheco, product manager of Acquia, and we have Mike Klaczynski, product marketing director of SignalFx. On today's agenda, we'll be talking about the transformation to DevOps and the tools that empower developers. Acquia will be covering how they are transforming their customer experience with a culture of observation. And SignalFx will be sharing some insight into real-time monitoring across your AWS environment using SignalFx. Please feel free to ask questions in the question pane throughout the webinar. We'll be having a Q&A discussion later on. The objectives of today's webinar are to provide you with some insights on the DevOps transformation, understanding how extremely powerful consolidated monitoring and alerting for your AWS environment can be, how SignalFx can help make that timely data-driven decisions across your entire organization, optimization of the cost and capacity of AWS environments, and releasing better code quicker by leveraging real-time streaming analytics. As mentioned, I'm Trevor Hansen. I'm a partner solution architect with Amazon Web Services, and DevOps is truly a passion of mine. As I've seen this transformation firsthand in organizations, and hopefully I can share some useful insight with you today. As organizations start to focus more on technology, they find traditional development models slow and somewhat burdensome. They need to be able to innovate and get to the market quickly, as well as reacting faster to customer experience and iterate on their existing portfolio. IT needs to be able to keep up with this pace by provisioning new resources as developers require it. Operations also need to be able to relay customer experience back into the development groups to produce useful enhancements. And this is where DevOps can really help with that. Developers and DevOps enable this transformation by changing the structure of development teams to make them more agile, giving them both the power of responsibility of owning their products, from planning and designs to operations and optimization. Supported by tooling and automation, they can spend more time focusing on improving the user experience rapidly or reducing the amount of time they spend on operational overhead. Instead of development teams owning a large number of products across an entire organization, they streamline their efforts to focus on a small set of objectives and take ownership of positive outcomes from their business and their customer experience. AWS enables DevOps by providing on-demand resources and tools that fits the DevOps practices. To be able to support DevOps, teams have to change the way they deploy infrastructure. They need to be able to design loosely coupled applications. They also need to be able to understand how the application is behaving. In addition to that, they need to be able to make incremental changes continuously, rather than doing larger quarterly releases. You're seeing, doing multiple updates daily is a very common practice you see in DevOps. And one area is infrastructure as code. By replacing lengthy infrastructure provisioning requests with on-demand resources, AWS changes the way developers and teams deploy their applications. They can now manage their infrastructure the same way they do with code, with repeatable version-controlled stacks. Using CloudFormation, teams can define their network, storage, compute, and other AWS resources as code alongside their applications. When failures do occur, automation can be used to restore that system to the last known good state. This reduces the need for DevOps teams to manually intervene, allowing them to focus more on their end product. And microservice really enables this. AWS has a number of solutions focused on microservices. A change in developments from large monolithical applications to smaller loosely coupled APIs. By adoption of microservices, developers reduce the blast radius from changes in their application, allowing them to make changes more freely. Services become smaller and more focused, and infrastructure used for them can be tuned and scaled to meet that application's unique requirements. From our Elastic Container Services for managing Docker containers to a fully serverless approach using Lambda and API Gateway, AWS provides scalable solutions that shift towards this microservices approach. And in today's webinar, we're really focusing on the logging and monitoring aspect, because DevOps teams are also responsible for the development lifecycle and the performance of those applications on the infrastructure, as well as the security and compliance. Using these sources of information, developers can have a full view of their environments and respond to anything going on. Along with the AWS native tools, SignalFx provides tools that empower organizations to make data-driven decisions and equip developers with consolidated monitoring and alerting to understand the end-to-end DevOps lifecycle. We'll be learning more about this shortly. And then just touching on the continuous integration and continuous delivery, tooling to manage the end-to-end lifecycle of code deployments enables DevOps teams to quickly get their ideas in front of their customers. Our developer tools are designed to help you take your code through that development pipeline from design to deployment. The shift from a few releases quarterly to many releases a day allows developers to improve their applications faster. This is where the transformation in cloud and adoption of DevOps models, when starting to decouple services and leveraging containers and your ephemeral architecture, this is where the visibility into that underlying infrastructure becomes essential to empowering developers. SignalFx provides this monitoring interface for DevOps. They fit perfectly into this layer by providing the developers with real-time monitoring and visibility. Digital application changes the requirements for business operations and new modes of engagement. SignalFx provides that scalable enterprise monitoring solution at the heart of every digital transformation. And this is where, getting that ephemeral architecture and providing that visibility to the DevOps really becomes a powerful tool. SignalFx discovers and collects data from a wide range of sources. This includes custom app metrics, container platforms, infrastructure metrics, and ephemeral architecture, to mention a few. This data is ingested and processed through their highly scalable real-time streaming analytics engine, enabling predictive monitoring and preventative operations. Once the data is processed, you can explore and visualize that data in real time, enable conditional-based alerting and automation that can help empower the DevOps transformation. With all this in mind, I'm going to hand over to Chico from Acquia to talk about their experience, their transformation, and how they are transforming Acquia's customer experience with a culture of observation. Over to you.
Thanks for that. So hi again, I'm Aaron Pacheco. I'm a product manager at Acquia. And today we're going to talk about, again, how Acquia utilized the DevOps methodology and SignalFx to optimize our performance. So in 2016, after several years of working on AWS with open source monitoring services, we found ourselves in a position where we had over 12,000 Amazon EC2 instances, and our monitoring was unable to keep up with the scale of servers that it was trying to report on and the amount of alerts being generated out of it. It was causing issues for our operations team on the order of magnitude of 200 to 400 incidents on any given day, with some days, as you can see, spikes up to 600 or even 1,000 alerts. And what we found upon digging into those was that up to 85% of them were unactionable or duplicates of issues we'd already known were needed to be addressed. Further, we found that even attempting to load and access the monitoring services was becoming a problem at scale. Pages would take a little bit longer to load as the fleet grew larger, and it was impacting our mean time to resolution. Some of the other issues we found as this company grew larger was that our teams were beginning to isolate themselves with different monitoring services depending on what they were trying to accomplish and the systems they wanted to work with. This led to us losing a great deal of technical expertise in the field and the area of monitoring, and it resulted in us being unable to share best practices. It resulted in a number of different services needing to be paid for or accessed whenever we wanted answers. And as a result, we saw limited adoption of a single specific monitoring service across the organization. All of this made it difficult for us to see in one spot all the right information, analyzed the right way, regardless of what product or service or team was trying to access it. So it's really slowed us down in addition to the amount of noise that we were seeing. So we realized in 2016 that we needed to find a solution. So as a general rule, when an organization is trying to solve a problem, they look at it from three perspectives. One, can we go open source? So generally this is, I'm going to download something for free and our existing staff is going to integrate it and operate it. To sustain a model like that, you're going to require generally some infrastructure, a degree of maintenance work, and over time you're going to have to modernize it to make sure you're keeping up with the latest needs of your product, your teams, your customers, and technology itself. And the biggest risk with going with this model is that it becomes outdated over time, or you could lose resources to other more important initiatives while monitoring languishes in the background. We also looked at the custom build option. Now, I put free here in quotes because you're technically not paying for anything, but you really are when it comes to the fact that you have to hire or maintain engineers who can build, integrate, operate, and continue to optimize that infrastructure. Acquia looked into this a number of times, and what we found is that it was really difficult to find people who specialize in cloud monitoring and who can lead that project and make sure that it's done correctly. We were also concerned about the amount of risk involved in a system like that, where, again, you were responsible for 24/7 monitoring of your own monitoring infrastructure, a little bit of meta monitoring there. You're responsible for updating it, maintaining it, and keeping it modern in the future. It's a lot of risk and a lot of pay. You're paying a lot upfront for something that's not going to be delivered right away. The third option was to purchase a service. So obviously the pricing varies by vendor here, but the advantage is that you're not paying for engineers to work on something internally. The alerting mechanisms and everything are on that service. You are not required to be on call if it goes down necessarily, and you have an entire organization who's responsible for being subject matter experts in the field. So for us, we realized this is what our customers do with us. They're looking to us to be the 24/7 resource, the masters in the domain. So this is the approach that we took, and we realized it would be a lot better in the long run because the updates would be provided as a part of the service. We would have some minimal amount of updates required on our end just to keep the agent running, but otherwise we could have a small staff working on integrations and maintenance. So the next step, once we realized that we wanted to go with a third-party service, was trying to identify how we want to evaluate the different vendors and compare them to each other. One of the first things that any company is going to look at when it comes to evaluating a vendor is the cost. So for us, that broke down into a few things. What is the cost of a proof of concept and how long will it last? What are the goals of that proof of concept and what are you trying to achieve out of it? How do you know that it was successful and that you can make a business case internally that you can get an investment in that service? You also have to look at how the pricing model works out for that organization. Are they going to charge per host, or is it a metrics-based solution? Which one is going to allow you to scale as you grow, and which one's going to allow you to tweak and tune knobs to reduce utilization if you need to for cost savings? Another thing that is often forgotten is trainings. So does the company offer trainings? Are they included in the service, or do they come with an add-on price? Do they offer a field architect or a TAM, someone who can give you expertise and help you, especially with your initial integration? And the third thing is, where do you see this going in a year, 2 years, 3 years? Because again, costs are important, and it's something that you want to weigh against the build or open source models. Another segment of the vendor evaluation criteria falls into the category of features. So this is where you're asking your technical and non-technical users to evaluate whether or not they could see themselves using this, and if it is an enhancement or a value add to the work they're doing. So for us, we had our account managers and our engineers take a look at the service to identify, is this something you could use? Does it make your day-to-day job easier? What are the problems you see now, and are these things that we can work with the vendor to address? What we found also is that a robust API is very important because a lot of our services and a lot of our users are going to be communicating over an API as opposed to using a user interface. We wanted to look at feature breadth because it's one thing to have just a basic interface that kind of does what you need it to do, but where is it going in the long term? What are the future plans for integrations, optimizations with regards to feature set and performance? Do the features address all of the pain points that your organization has raised? And then if you have compliance issues at your organization, where does this company fall with regards to security? The third segment that we looked at was the ease of integration. So that really is as simple as it sounds. How easy is it for us to use this product? Are we just installing an agent? Do we have to build a custom mechanism to send data to this service? What exactly needs to happen for us to get the full value? What about ease of modification or customization? So for us, this was looking at a service like CollectD and then saying, we just need to add this plugin for Varnish, one for Nginx, one for MySQL, Apache, etc. We realized we could customize it on a per hosting stage basis, or that's AWS account in AWS speak, and we could change the thresholds for the amount of data we were sending and the frequency of data. We looked at the ease of maintenance as well. How difficult is it to update the agent on a routine basis? And then finally, we looked at what the breadth of external integrations were. How many things could they integrate with in AWS? Could they use all the services? What about things like Java? What about other services like, again, PHP, Apache, MySQL? Do they have all of those things out of the box, or do you have to build them yourself? The final evaluation criteria we looked at, and again, this is something often overlooked, is reputation. For us, we had to do a number of comparisons to determine what the best company to work with would be, because we wanted a partner, not just a vendor. So we looked at public comparisons. How does vendors X, Y, and Z compare to each other? So those are things that you would usually do an internet search for. We also spoke to a number of customers of each of the vendors we looked at. And while many people would rave about SignalFx, what we found is that there were other vendors out there who customers simply could not give the same rave reviews to, and that was very concerning. We wanted to look at product maturity as well. Sometimes you'll find that just because a company is the name in the space, it's not necessarily the best company to work with, because maybe they've been around a while and technology has evolved. So in that regard, we realized we don't want to be a guinea pig for a new company, even if they are cutting edge. And we don't necessarily want to fall and rely upon the technical debt of an older company. We want to work with a company that's modern and able to adjust to the needs of modern infrastructures and technologies, but not so modern that they don't have a full feature set, they're not robust, and they can't scale. So that was important for us when looking at SignalFx as well. And finally, corporate stability is something to keep in mind. If you want to look at the financial situation of an organization, what's their funding long term, especially if they're a startup, what we found is that our executive team was very interested in that data, and it was something that most companies might overlook in an evaluation. So once we decided upon SignalFx for all of the reasons previously mentioned, then we fell into the phases of integration. First, that was the preliminary trial, and that was during the POC phase. We wanted to inspect the code and really understand what exactly the agent was doing. Is it sending data, or are we sending data to an agent, or how does that work? So for us, it was CollectD with SignalFx. It's an open source. You can take a look at it and get all the information you need about how it functions. There's nothing proprietary in it, so that was very reassuring for us and our engineers. We also took time to read the documentation and try running the agent locally to see how it handled performance, and again, ease of integration, ease of modification. We extended the proof of concept to a larger scale on our smallest fleet at AWS. So this was 2,500 instances. So we installed and configured the agent, we deployed it, and then we started looking at how it operated at scale. Performance was not an issue, which was awesome, but it was interesting to see the amount of data and how it was coming in. And this was an opportunity for us to provide some feedback to the vendor about what's working well and what isn't, so that we could get those addressed in a timely fashion. And it allows us to get a more accurate perspective of how the service will work at scale. We then had to deploy it to our larger fleets in more controlled phases. We wanted to make sure that any issues we addressed earlier on in the POC didn't pop up again later in the POC as it went to our larger customers. And in that regard, there were no issues at all. And finally, we had to assess the overall impact of the service. Is it slowing things down, using more CPU or memory? We didn't see any of those issues, which was great, and it helped us drive forward to the next phase. With regards to proof of value, there's a few things here to keep in mind, because if a company is going to move from a model where they've either built something themselves or they're going with open source, it's going to be difficult to say, hey, let's invest in something instead of just doing something free. So in this regard, we wanted to look at all of the value that we were getting out of SignalFx by default. That meant saying, hey, we're seeing a reduction in time to resolution on things. We're finding information that we didn't realize we had before. We're getting 250 data points per minute 250 metrics collected per instance per minute instead of just a few metrics per minute. So this was all good data that we could feed back into the organization and say, hey, look at all the things that we can see now. We also wanted to gather internal feedback. Who are the people that are the strongest advocates for the service? What do they think? And who are the biggest detractors? Because if you can win over the biggest detractors, it's a much easier business case to make. Then we channeled that feedback all the way back to the vendor, in this case, SignalFx. And we wanted to make sure that they knew what were the most important things to address. And they were all addressed in a timely manner, which in and of itself is really indicative of the quality of a product and its organization. The last step here is to build a coalition. Once you know what the strengths and weaknesses of a product are and the value it provides, you can start making a case internally for other people to work with you to help get an investment case up and running. If there is true value in a monitoring service, then you have to be able to explain that in excruciating detail sometimes so that the people who could potentially block investment understand that there are a lot of people who want this. It will impact the organization. Here are all the ways how. Here's the value that you'll have. But also you'll want to note, here are the consequences of not investing in a service like this. All great data points to keep in mind. After this point, we began the final rollout. In this regard, we wanted to make sure a few key points were hit. One, we wanted to make sure that it was rolled out completely, everywhere it could be, in the right way, so that we knew it was running properly and that we were getting the maximum amount of value for what we were paying for. We had to set up detectors and dashboards utilizing the key features of SignalFx and making sure that we were getting all the data points we needed, in which case, if we weren't, we would have to add additional metrics. Were we getting the alerting functionality we needed? Now that this thing is operating at scale, do additional detectors need to be made? Can we deprecate old monitoring things in favor of the new detectors? Are we finding new types of data that need to be alerted on that we didn't have previously? All of this becomes relevant here. It's also an opportunity to start creating some automations. In our case, we changed 2 of our internal tools to generate dynamic links to SignalFx so that when our incident responders or the people doing performance audits were looking up customer information, they could just run a single command line command, it would generate a dashboard, and they could access the data in SignalFx. And this was really great with adoption. And then finally, we looked at communications and trainings. So we wanted to make sure people were aware that SignalFx is a thing now. This is a product you should be using. Here's how you use it. Here are when the trainings will be held. Let us know if you have questions. And we wanted to make sure that adoption was as high as possible because, again, you want to continuously provide feedback back to the stakeholders, the people who had helped advocate for the service, and the people who especially helped budget it, because you always want to be able to prove that the thing you invested in provided value. Finally, you're going to want to look at long-term assessments of the value of the service. So this comes in a few different phases. One, what does it take to extend the product and make it work in ways that you had never previously considered? What are pain points that haven't been addressed by your organization? What is it going to take to maintain the service moving forward? What changes are required for the service to evolve to meet your needs, your customer needs, etc.? You also want to continue to assess the wins that the service has provided to your organization and make sure that they are communicated frequently and with good enough detail that people are keeping in mind why you are investing in a service like this. For us, this helps ensure not only that there is a continued funding in a monitoring service, but that at the time of renewal, there's a long-standing story and reputation for the product that will ensure that it continues to get funded. You're also going to want to make sure that you continuously notify new hires about the service so that you can continue to increase adoption. What we found is that if new hires are not trained in the service, then it loses a little bit of momentum. So we always try to make sure new hires understand exactly how the service works and how they can use it to make their jobs more efficient. And this makes sure that we keep a high adoption rate. Again, continues the story of why we're investing in the service. Another extended value point for us was consolidating all of our disparate monitoring services onto SignalFx. This allowed us to save some money, but also provided some additional benefits because different teams weren't using different services, requiring each of them to interpret the data in a different way and access various systems to try and understand the full picture of what's happening to a service or a customer. Finally, the last thing you'll want to do is make sure that you understand where the product is going and where your needs are going. Make sure that they continue to be aligned, understand how the product will grow over time, understand how your utilization will grow over time, and make sure that you're keeping track of the cost relative to your needs as an organization. For Acquia, we've seen tangible benefits since installing SignalFx almost 2 years ago. For one, now that we're monitoring over 20,000 Amazon EC2 instances, we don't see any of the performance problems we had when we were using open source services. The dashboards load promptly, the detectors operate at massive scale, sometimes with hundreds or even a few thousand alerts running at any given point in time, and we don't see significant delays at any point. We have seen a significant decrease in noise, however. As we've worked to optimize our monitoring services, we can focus on the things that are most relevant, meaning we can eliminate monitoring for things that don't matter and focus on what is impacted, what needs to be addressed quickly. This has also been really useful for our site reliability engineers who are trying to focus on SLO and SLA tracking to make sure that issues in the product itself are not causing problems downstream. Again, with consolidated monitoring, it meant that we were able to have teams, isolated or disparate teams, communicate to each other best practices and methods of utilizing SignalFx. So instead of each team being a master of their own distinct service, everyone is able to communicate about how to solve certain problems, analyze certain data, or just spin up SignalFx in general. And that has helped increase adoption and reduce the time it takes to fully understand and onboard the product to new features and the feature to new products. Otherwise, we've seen really broad adoption, where originally we only had a few dozen people at Acquia who were comfortable using our old monitoring services. Now over 400 employees utilize SignalFx on a regular basis, and this includes technical and non-technical folks like our product management team, our account management team, etc. So that's over half the company right now is using SignalFx as part of their day jobs. And where this has provided exceptional efficiency is with regards to the number of requests that come internally. So we can look at this a few ways. One, referring to the previous slide, because people are able to find their own information, they don't need to ask others to get it for them. So that improves their efficiency and reduces the burden on downstream teams. We were also able to reduce a lot of our AWS costs almost instantaneously. What we found is that we had over 800 instances in AWS that were almost completely idle. We didn't realize that one of our products was not properly reaping itself. So we were able to go in, we got an initial assessment that it would save us over $600K in annual AWS costs. And upon further review by our finance team, once everything was factored in, we saw over $1 million in savings. We're also starting to move towards what many companies strive to achieve, which is a single pane of glass across all our monitoring services. This means taking a look at data points from the server health monitoring, the application performance monitoring, uptime monitoring where available, and things like log monitoring. So as you can see in this screenshot, we are providing data points from a few different disparate spaces across the platform, and we get context about, okay, there's a problem with the 200s or a problem with PHP, or there's a spike in 500s. We can then take this data and go to a separate monitoring service if we need to dig in and isolate what's going on. But at least now we have the context when we're doing diagnostics. As mentioned before, we're also seeing 25 to 50% faster average time to resolution on our incidents. And many of them are resolved within minutes because people can look at one dashboard and say, hey, there's the thing that's anomalous. There's the source of the problem. There's the action that was taken that caused this behavior. So for us, that translates into direct value to our customers. And finally, speaking of direct value to customers, we've created a feature called Stack Metrics because we wanted our customers to see the type of insights that SignalFx provides. This allowed them to see the utilization patterns and the trends over time so that they could make more data-driven decisions when they're diagnosing issues on their site and planning for long-term needs. One other really important aspect of using a service like SignalFx is that it's provided us with lightning-fast insights, again, both for the technical and non-technical users. By having dashboards at a fleet-wide level, we can see when problems happen in AWS regions or if we want to look at specific aspects of our platform. So for us, having that level of visibility allows us to respond and resolve issues more quickly. And it also allows us to make more intelligent business cases. We can assess whether or not a fleet needs to be optimized. In the top left screenshot, you can see where we actually optimize our storage utilization at one point in 2017 once we realized that we could cut back. So having this insight at a glance allows for much stronger business cases. And finally, moving back right to where we started about the DevOps model, this has made our DevOps team and our SREs much more efficient. Again, by having one single source of truth to access for new products and for existing products, they can share knowledge. They can make sure that they're integrating with the service as soon as the new product spins up and also prior to launch. They can monitor data for each of the hosting releases or the product releases, general code releases, whatever you have, to make sure that the tests are passing, that no issues are arising in a canary stage or before it goes to production. They can keep an eye on SLA monitoring and SLOs to make sure that the service is stable. And they can make sure that any issues that are caught downstream can be fed back into the monitoring service for enhancements to make sure that the issue does not repeat moving forward. In summary, Acquia has made great use of SignalFx over the past 2 years, and it wouldn't be a short stretch to say that it's really revolutionized the way that we do business. We're now operating as a more informed organization, and now our customers are as well. We're seeing improved morale, improved efficiency, cost savings, and a slew of other benefits that have really made the investment in SignalFx worthwhile for us and made us move more close to the traditional DevOps model. And next, I'll hand it off to Mike, who's the product marketing director at SignalFx.
Thanks, Chico. Thanks for sharing your story and how Acquia uses SignalFx across its AWS infrastructure. As you mentioned, my name is Mike Kozinski, and I'm the product marketing director at SignalFx. Now, before we get to the Q&A portion of the webinar, I'll take a few minutes to introduce our real-time metrics platform. As Trevor mentioned, there are two main shifts that organizations are undergoing today. The first is the adoption of cloud and ephemeral architecture. This means an exponential increase in the complexity, churn, variety, sheer volume, and speed at which data is generated and needs to be processed. The second is the shift in team structure, from traditionally separate engineering and operations teams to a DevOps model. Now you have hundreds or even thousands more people who need visibility into their operational data, and they need it much more frequently and for various unique use cases. And because you can't manage what you can't monitor, you need SignalFx as the unifying platform to give everyone in your organization real-time visibility into their operations. So how is the visibility provided by SignalFx any different from logs and APM? Because they also provide visibility. But they fail in these new environments where the requirements are exponentially greater. We typically see our customers fall into one of three stages of cloud adoption. The first is groups primarily on premises with large monolithic applications, and they may have a few small teams beginning to experiment with the cloud. They typically have just hundreds of components. The second phase is where things start to get interesting. We call this phase decentralized chaos because those first few groups have multiplied across teams and departments, and now everyone is migrating workloads to the cloud, trying new tools, and implementing new processes. With that decentralization comes duplication and lots of inefficiency. There are typically now thousands of components in the cloud at this stage. Now, the third stage is what we call organized enablement. This is where cloud-native companies are born, but those having to journey here must first figure out how to manage their tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of components and how to enable all of their teams. They have to figure out how to standardize their tools and centralize their governance and best practices. Now, the efficiency and innovation possible at this stage is the reason everyone is willing to endure the costs and hassles of the previous stages. And SignalFx helps our customers move quickly and successfully in stage 3 by providing a centralized operational intelligence platform that not only scales, but also works in real time, something that the APM and log vendors struggle to do. That's why we typically see them get left behind in stage 1. So what are the requirements and why are metrics uniquely positioned as the foundation? First is the ability to ingest and make sense of a wide variety of components, some of which are distributed globally and sourced from hundreds of vendors. Next is scale, the sheer number of components, many of which are in high churn environments and replaced multiple times per day. Making sense of noise means focusing on the forest instead of the trees, the overall service availability and not the individual components, which can themselves be noisy. Next, smart alerting means meaningful alerts built for your business logic and triggered right when they matter, before issues become customer-facing. And finally, speed, ingesting high-frequency 1-second resolution metrics and processing them at very low latency, so you know exactly what's happening as it happens, not minutes later. Now, the only way to address all of these requirements is with a new approach, and that requires a different architecture. Now, SignalFx is the only real-time monitoring service with a true streaming architecture. Our founders built Facebook's original monitoring solution in the late 2000s, a service that could scale to hundreds of thousands of components and enable the now famous move fast and break things culture we've come to know as DevOps. They solved the biggest challenges in dealing with streaming data, and processing data in stream has many of those challenges. They realized that companies would soon be dealing with the same difficulties, and so they started SignalFx in 2013 to address that market. The architecture you see here is our streaming engine. We've been granted 6 patents so far, with several more pending. This architecture means that from when a metric hits our endpoint to when we fire an alert, update a visualization, or trigger an automation, it only takes 1.2 seconds. Now, a couple points on how we deal with metricized data. We first split the human-readable metadata, the part that changes infrequently, from the time series data, the part that updates every second. The time series values are adjusted for lateness, regardless of how far away they're coming from. They're also rolled up to 1 minute, 5 minute, and 1 hour aggregations, as well as calculated for min, max, count, sum, and latest. Now, the data is mirrored into our time series store, so we can do week over week, month over month, and year over year analysis. And meanwhile, our main stream is pushed into our PubSub bus, which feeds directly into our analytics engine we call SignalFlow. Our analytics are powerful enough to allow data scientists to script their own models, both through our GUI and APIs, but easy enough for everyday users to customize their own alerts, charts, and automations. By building a streaming engine, we've been able to scale massively and process data at 1-second resolution and 1-second latency. Now, there are many use cases for our platform, the highest level being our infrastructure navigator. This chart shows an overview of all of our services, containers, and application, and allows you to filter on standard AWS tags as well as custom tags. So you can make better sense by region, availability zone, service name, instant type, and so on. Next, by sending in API and business metrics, which we don't charge you extra for, and what some vendors call custom metrics, you can have a single pane of glass into how your operations are affecting your business. This means seeing how much your services and APIs cost to run, as well as monitoring your SLAs, both internally and those you provide to your own customers. Better insights for all of your teams means you can offer better customer service. Now, if you're deploying frequently through a CI/CD pipeline or just doing emergency bug fixes, our real-time dashboards will show you immediately when your new versions are live and how they perform compared to the previous versions. This means you can roll back immediately if you need to, a requirement for canary and blue-green deployment scenarios. Now, a big area of focus for our customers is managing their AWS capacity and spend. We initially developed these dashboards for our own internal use, but now they're available to all of our customers. We start with an overview of all of your instances, their count, cost, utilization, and we call out any outliers. You can then dive into underutilized instances and reallocate capacity. We show you the number and percentage of instances below 50% utilization over the last 30 days. These are specific actionable insights you can do something about right away to save money. Lastly, you can dive into your reserved instances, see their cost and normalized coverage by instance family, and compare that to your spot instances, decreasing them and again saving you money. Our customers are frequently recognized by AWS for having the highest RI coverages. You can ask Chico about that during the Q&A. Now, the shift to serverless poses unique challenges for monitoring. That's why we developed our own open source Lambda wrapper, and we're also a launch partner for the AWS Serverless Application Repository. We let you collect 1-second data for Lambdas so you can have better visibility into their cost, performance, and usage. The overview dashboard shows you the number of active functions, the total invocations, including overtime, and also grouped by service. A closer look shows you the average duration, again, including overtime, the number of cold starts, and the longest duration by service. And for individual Lambdas, you can see the number of invocations, again, including overtime, by version, as well as the number of errors. All of this at 1-second resolution with 1-second latency. Our platform has attracted many customers of all sizes, across all verticals and stages of cloud adoption, from newer cloud-first companies like Acquia, Yelp, HubSpot, and Kayak, to organizations in the process of migrating to the cloud, like Carbon Black, Lululemon, and Ellie Mae. And finally, cloud-native, app-focused companies like Benchling, Mist, Drizzly, and Tenfold. We'd love to add you to this list, so we've made it very easy to get started if you're already on AWS. We have extensive integrations across all AWS services, including through CloudWatch and through our open source Collecti agent. Or if you're using Telegraph, Graphite, or StatsD agents, we can ingest that data as well. You can be up and running in just a matter of hours. That's it for me. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them during the Q&A right after a few more wrap-up points from Trevor.
Thanks a lot. So we've covered quite a bit of ground, and I'd like to just summarize some key points before we dive into that Q&A. In this transformation, SignalFx is truly an extremely powerful tool that obviously empowers developers and this transformation to a more DevOps-focused development. As we have mentioned, having insights into your infrastructure, your service, and your application in real time is now a must-have for an organization, especially around DevOps and automation. SignalFx truly understands this transformation and helps your organization stay ahead of these operations. Then just providing a quick summary on the DevOps. DevOps enables that transformation by changing the structure of the development teams to make them more agile and give them the power and the responsibility of owning their product, from planning and design to operations and optimization. Supported by tooling and automation, they can spend more time focusing on improving that experience rapidly while reducing the amount of time they spend on operational overhead. And this is where SignalFx really empowers those developers. Instead of development teams owning a large number of products across an entire organization, they streamline their efforts to focus on a small set of objectives and taking ownership of that specific area. AWS provides organizations the infrastructure and the tools to migrate towards that DevOps and an easy-to-use pay-as-you-go model. Along with the AWS native tools, there are thousands of partner solutions built on AWS, which helps you with this DevOps transformation. Much like we've seen today on how critical it is to have that visibility and monitoring, and how SignalFx provides this layer to enable developers in this transformation. So stepping into the questions, and thank you for everyone that's stuck out to this point in the questions that have come through. Something just to mention before we dive into that is if we don't answer any of your questions now, we will be reaching out to you after this webinar and addressing any of those questions that were maybe not discussed in this particular portion. We also plan to send out a follow-up email with the slide deck and a link to this video within the next 3 days or so. And please feel free, if there's any additional questions or anything that you have for Acquia, SignalFx, or even AWS, please reach out to us. We're more than happy to provide some additional clarity and help you through this journey, because this partnership aspect is an essential aspect in it, and this transformation can really change and make you, as I mentioned, become a lot more competitive, especially being able to iterate on your applications using these DevOps models. So the first question I have is for Chico. Chico, I wanted to see what were the challenges Acquia faced while attempting to justify an investment in SignalFx?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. So there were a number of challenges. The first, like I mentioned, was the company. Remember that the people who are in the weeds and most benefit from the monitoring services are very different from the people high level who'd be approving the budget. So for them, those at the top, the question was, why should we pay for something that we've previously gotten for free? And that's where you have to have a solid business case around here's what the pros and cons of the open source solution. And for us, that was, yeah, it's free, but you also get what you pay for. And look at where it's gotten us. So the idea of us hiring more people to try and make this work and not getting results right away was really not appealing at the high level at Acquia. So we had that one benefit. And then with regards to try building something, we had tried that a number of times and were really unsuccessful. So we had it going for us then that we're not going to try it a third or fourth time in that regard. So then the question became, okay, if the solution is SignalFx, one, can you show us competitive comps? Why are you choosing this company over all the others? Then it's down to, can you get the best? What is the price compared to all the other options? So, again, you do an analysis of what your needs are versus the competitors. And then again, it really just boils down to a competition for budget within the organization. So for us, we really needed to build that alliance of people across the organization, and we wanted to make sure they understood, like, with this service, here are all the benefits to account management and TAMs and customers and support. Here's how it'll impact downtime and incident response and corporate efficiency and morale and all these things. We had to really identify all these points. We had to show what the pain would be to each division of the organization if we didn't invest in the service, because that told, that was part of the story. Like, if we don't do this, here are the consequences. And especially what we found is after the POC, once people tried it, they were really hesitant to give it up after that, and they became even stronger advocates. And then, the last part was that with regards to funding, the question was, can you live without it? And again, having that insight and saying, can we? Yes, but here's what the impact is going to be to the company and morale in the organization. That all of that really came down to whether or not the executive team was willing to accept the risk and compared to the other things that were on the plate for budget. So those were a lot of the challenges we needed to face, and thankfully we're able to get past them.
Excellent, thanks. Another thing, just to tie on to that, I'll stick with you on a follow-up question. Thanks for Glenn for prompting that. Especially now with companies looking at, moving towards this more DevOps focused in, these development models, and also starting to use these, this monitoring tooling that can really empower this development. It requires, a big change and so on. And one of the changes, how do you estimate that level of usage if you're going to be starting to use something like SignalFx? And I think, you did touch on it a bit on your portion of the presentation is, how do you start getting that estimation of what sort of usage levels would it be, and how can you empower people to start using this tool on their day-to-day jobs? How did you guys go through that justification process and being able to estimate how powerful would this tool be without a POC, and how did you get to that point where you got people to actually play with it?
Yeah, so another great question. So I'll try and take it in phases, and obviously let me know if I've missed anything. So starting at the beginning, it was a very difficult. There are some vendors who say, just tell us how many instances you have, and here's your price. And that's a very simple model to work off of, but it doesn't leave you very many knobs to turn when as your fleet grows. So do your costs. So with SignalFx, we had the benefit of the metrics-based pricing, which allowed us to say, okay, we're going to send more or less data and more or less frequency. So we had a rough idea there, but the drawback and the challenge with the solution is, okay, well, what are we sending, and how often are we going to send it? And that's really difficult to estimate, especially right up front, just trying to figure it out the first time. But it's obviously a worthwhile challenge in the long run. So for us, what we did is we looked at all the different instances that we were running and tried to assess, okay, what's their count? What's a good granularity? And you have to compare and contrast what people think is good granularity for data. And what are the things we absolutely need to send? What are the things we don't need to send? And from there, we were able to get a rough estimate of how many data points per minute and active metric time series we would send. little more challenging in a container-based model. But we took our assumptions, we run that through the pricing model and get an understanding of the estimates and try to tweak our needs accordingly and reset expectations internally. But then it's also a matter of, when you're doing this analysis, can we test it out on a very small scale during the trial period before the POC and say, okay, in a hosting dev environment or a test environment, what does it look like the metrics are, and can we extrapolate that to the larger fleet to get a more accurate picture? So that's kind of what we needed to do in that regard. And then you had a second part of the question, which I need to be refreshed on.
Yeah, no, I think you covered that pretty well. What I want to do is maybe step over to Mike quickly.
Yep.
So there is another excellent question from Glenn. He mentioned that they're primarily non-EC2 based, and they're using things such as Lambda and SQS and so on. Can you just give us a bit of clarity around how you guys are collecting that data from that, and what is the value add from SignalFx in that area?
Sure, great question. So the easiest way to ingest data into SignalFx is through CloudWatch. That's your typical first source of data. But the second one is through our Collect the Agent. So as we mentioned, that's completely open source. You can go in, see all the code. And when you deploy that onto these different services, you can custom instrument any sort of metrics you want. So whatever makes the most business sense to you, you're able to get those metrics. So that's on top of, the basic ones for, if you're looking at Lambda, duration, invocations, cold starts, so on and so forth. But you can bring in API data, business data, whatever it might be, so that it's not just raw infrastructure metrics, it's actually business metrics that are actionable and have a meaning to your organization.
Excellent, thanks. Yeah, so another follow-up question is, where do people start? Being able to play with this now, to actually see SignalFx, to put it to the test, to test it in environments. Where would you recommend they start? And you mentioned you could get this up within a few hours. And there's no better way to put it to the test, because you can actually start seeing that reduction in noise. And I think, coming from somebody being tasked to implement monitoring solutions, I've really gone through that pain point of implementing something and you just have loads of noise and your teams actually have overhead. And playing with SignalFx, I've really seen that reduction, and I can see why Acquia is really proud of using this platform. Where would you advise people start, and is there free aspects, or where would one start on this process?
Sure, great question. So, as with anything, a test drive is really the best way to get a sense for the platform. We talked about the architecture, but the way that really comes to life is putting us side by side with some of the tools you're already using or other competitors are considering. And you'll see firsthand not only how quickly SignalFx scales, how quickly we're able to process the data, but just how easy the platform is for any sorts of your users, right? And so, we offer a 14-day free trial. That's a great way to get up and running right away. You can deploy, again, our Collect the Agent or collect CloudWatch metrics right into SignalFx, in just a couple hours. But we also have a very extensive POC process. So, once you get to that stage, we'll work very closely, our technical team with your technical team, and we invite you to send essentially all of your production data to us, to not only prove that we're able to scale and deal with that data, but also to give you a better understanding of the different metrics you're interested in collecting, and what it's going to cost you.
Great, thanks a lot. Back to you, Chico. I have another question here. What challenges did Acquia face during that POC and pricing? I think you kind of did touch on that, but do you want to just maybe summarize, what were the big challenges you faced and how did you overcome those?
Right. So the challenges there were largely just around the coming to consensus internally about what is the most valuable data we can send to Signal, what's the right granularity, and then kind of working with the pricing model of SignalFx to say, okay, what can we live with, at least for this first rollout, and then if we need to remove some things down the road, add some things down the road. How can we plan accordingly? So it's challenging to predict what your needs will be. For us, when we were originally on our open source monitoring service, we weren't monitoring nearly as many different metrics because we only monitored the things we knew that were important. And with SignalFx out of the box, it monitors over 200 different metrics, depending on whether you're looking at Varnish or Nginx, Apache, whatever. So the depth of data we were getting, it was difficult for us to figure out what is relevant. We had to do a lot of internal surveys to figure out what people think is a good data, and people are going to have opinions about what we should keep, what we should get rid of, what granularity we should keep it at. So it's really trying to deal with those differences of opinions and coming to a consensus, and then making sure that just the decision's made, we're going to go with this, and here's the calculation of how many metrics we'll end up needing. So that was the real big challenge for us. But then I remembered what the follow-up question you asked earlier was: what challenges did we face with adoption afterwards? And for us, the difficulty there was around making sure, we had to have an advocate, and in our case, it was me, because it's one thing to say, okay, yes, we've got investment, we're going to implement this service, but if nobody's keeping on top of it, then you're investing in something that you're not making the most use out of. So for us, we had to make sure that, one, someone was really dedicated to making the dashboards, addressing concerns, maintaining the vendor relationship, doing trainings, dealing with the feedback from users, and continuously pushing and optimizing and making sure that we stay on track for a full implementation and consolidation. Because otherwise, it just falls through the cracks and you're not getting the full benefit. So that was a challenge there as well.
Great, thanks a lot. Mike, just one last question on your side is, what additional AWS services are you planning to expand into this current list that you currently have? Is there, there's a list, I think you guys provide the full breakdown on your website. You only had a few of those on your slide. Can you just talk to that point and being able to really collect that data and metrics from all AWS services?
Yeah, so we have integrations with AWS, and so those are literally right out of the box. You grab the agent, deploy it on that service, and you have the data. But what's really unique about us is we're actually able to ingest data from anywhere, whether it's, again, business metrics or even IoT data. We have an endpoint, and as long as you're sending data into that endpoint, we're able to process it in that same streaming fashion. So, again, basic integrations already provided right out of the box. And not only on top of those integrations is the agent, but it also includes dashboards with best practices. So if you're running EC2, we're going to have dashboards built out that show you all the metrics that are valuable for that. Same thing with all the other services.
Great. Thanks a lot, Mike. Yeah, so excellent. Thank you, Mike and Chico, for joining me today on this webinar. And I truly hope that everyone that's dialed in on this call today, they're walking with something valuable. So just to summarize everything, we will be providing follow-up emails after this, and we'll also provide the slide deck as well as the recording to this video within the next 3 days or so. And as mentioned, we're all here available to answer any additional questions. We'll also get back to any of those questions that we didn't answer in the FAQ section. Look, there is a couple of links that we provided on the slide here around, where can you start with SignalFx and how can you start learning more about DevOps and AWS. And I encourage you to really start looking into this. This is an area that, is really changing the way we develop software and applications, and monitoring is becoming an essential aspect of that. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope you have a fantastic week further.